great is this? The 92nd Street Y, man.
Can't believe we're here. What an institution. Thank you guys for coming. This is
it's awesome. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but this man just flew from where he's working on a Christopher Nolan movie, which is just mind-bogglingly great. Flew to LA to give his child a kiss, and then flew on the red-eye to get here. All because he really wanted to be at the 92nd Street Y. He was just telling me about it backstage. So this is awesome, man.
Chris Nolan, big Drake and Josh guy. So right in between Inception, he was like, you know what? That Josh Nichols really is quite the arc.
That's awesome. And he lost the British accent to say that too? That's amazing.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, that's incredible.
He makes it, but we all agree because he's so great.
Yeah, totally. So congrats on the book. As you know, I loved it. It's an incredibly brave and honest and inspiring book. And one way to read the book is that it's all about the power of decision making. And you started making decisions at a really young age, in New York City, at a much younger age than most people do. You kind of took charge of your life in many ways. And that's kind of where I want to start, which is, how did you decide that you'd amassed enough of a body of knowledge and stories and that this was the time to write the book?
I as a byproduct of sort of this social media sort of following in business that I got, was I started talking at colleges, and I would do like these sort of half stand-up, half moderated Q&A 1 hours, and just be glad, parents, to know that your tuition money is going to hiring people like me who didn't graduate high school. Speaking of the promising young minds of tomorrow.
The Chris Nolan thing is going to make the price go right up, by the way, also.
It's outstanding.
Yeah.
We're in full negotiations with Hofstra now.
Yeah.
And it's looking good. And I felt this connection that I was not expecting, and it allowed me to really understand, especially people at college age, but in their 20s and early 30s. I just think the assumption is that you should have things figured out, and that the world sort of tells us that by the time you're in your your late 20s, early 30s, that you need to have your path, and we're constantly, it used to be the world was, we compared ourselves against people at work, or someone who went to our local church, or a neighbor. But now with Instagram, we compare ourselves against Kylie Jenner.
Right.
And people that are crushing it at all times. And it's easy to sort of compare and despair. And so what I wanted to do was sort of write this book at this inflection point, at being 35, being someone who some people grew up with maybe, and to say I know that maybe it looked like I had a lot of things figured out because I was in this unique position, but I was going through my own challenges, and I want to give you guys a little bit of a peek into that.
Well, yeah, because as you're talking, I'm thinking that it would certainly seem from the outside that you're one of those people who had it all figured out the whole time. Right? And you talk about, Kylie, your online audience is pretty close to hers in terms of numbers.
Oh, I
in
wish,
some
Brian.
way.
She's the goal.
All right, good.
Oh, God. What I would do, I'd be all better.
But did you ever? The hole would finally be filled.
That'd be it. I'm telling you, I need a couple of things. I need 100 million on Instagram and some sort of sneaker deal. And it's a wrap. Air Josh.
Yeah, perfect.
I don't wear socks. What are we talking about here? I'm that guy.
But did you ever feel, because as you're saying it and having read the book, did you ever feel when you were projecting a certain version of yourself that it wasn't really, did you ever have a bifurcated sense of yourself as you were living it and knowing, I think I'm falling short in these areas, I don't have it together, but hey, I'm Josh, and you were presenting this different image?
It's a great question. I think, I don't know if both realities can be true, right? Because for many of us, we are we're taken care of to a certain extent. I don't want to project, but I think it's okay to have a decent childhood and to not have to worry about your next meal and to have your basic needs taken care of, but still emotionally, spiritually, psychologically to suffer. And because I find, and I'm the kind of guy who quotes modern day philosophers, but Alain de Botton talks about this, right? My kid knows how to brush his teeth like a champ, right? Like he's 3 years old, he knows normal hygiene, he like knows that baths are important, he knows when he smells it's not gonna be the best day. And like this is all ingrained in him, but but at no time does he know about his mental hygiene, right? And like the way in which to take care of his brain and his emotions. And I think it's just assumed that we all just, I wrote this book and I titled it Happy People Are Annoying because I assumed throughout my whole life that happiness was reserved for like the elite, like the generationally wealthy, the attractive quarterbacks, Tom Brady, basically.
Right.
Like I'd be stoked if I were you. And I just figured that I didn't receive the same manual that everyone else did at birth. And that manual taught you how to get through life. And it was by facing these things that I was able to sort of find a little bit of that contentment and joy that I was always seeking.
Well, you bring up, even as you were kind of going through what people assume is their birthright or how they feel they should be because of their circumstance, and you said, well, just because you have a stable home life and you know where your next meal is coming from. And that was certainly the perception maybe when people were watching you on television. But in truth, that wasn't the life you were living. Right? So, and I think it's beautiful the way you talk about it in the book. And you grew up in this city, mostly.
Yeah.
And, right? New York City,
yeah, New York.
mostly.
Yeah.
But I was surprised when I read the book to learn about how touch and go certain parts of your childhood were. And I think it's worth talking about what your circumstance was.
Sure. My mom was 42 when she had me, or she was 42 when she got pregnant, 43 when she had me. This is her joke that they wheeled her from delivery into menopause. It's a good joke. My dad was 63 when my mom got pregnant, so he was getting Social Security and chicks pregnant. So that's dope.
Well, but your dad, you say your dad in that way, but in the book you make a really big point of talking about the fact that you never met your father ever.
Yeah, I never met my dad, and I can't understand why he wouldn't want to, be around for such like a fetching, chubby, ambitious little kid. But my dad messed around on his wife, basically, from what I know, and it happened to be with my mom, and so 9 months later, she gave birth to this icon sitting before you. Oh my God.
But talk a little bit about the survival, but talk a little bit, because so much of the book is about you getting to a place where you were able to synthesize your origin story with the person that you are. But it doesn't seem like that came easily to you. So just talk a little bit about the survival skills you had to learn as somebody growing up in the situation you did. Because one of the things you talk about in the book is you said sometimes we would eat well. You talked about, and we're going to talk about this, about how food mattered, but you also said sometimes it was the two of you splitting one slice of pizza and being hungry. So and I think, you joked upstairs about being a people pleaser, and I just wonder how all that stuff is bundled together. And if you want to talk about it, because it gets to happiness, which the annoying happiness you're talking about is a put on kind of happiness, right? So can you just talk a little bit about that?
My mom and I say in the book that growing up, I would look at my friends at school and they would sort of have traditional family structures. Like, it seemed like the parents were sort of upper management and the kids were the employees. And the parents would sort of like bark down orders. But my mom and I were like a startup. It was like she was the CEO and I was the assistant, and then we would sort of switch roles every now and then. And we were scrappy and we had to pivot. And sometimes we were like very much middle class and other times lower middle class, and just sometimes we were out of money. And I think that was part of my mom being a business person in the 80s and a woman and having to like fight all these uphill battles to scrap for her kid. Basically, like, I spent most of my time, like I talk about as a kid, my best friends were the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Ace Ventura and Billy Madison. Like, I was obsessed with television, but I assumed all kids were obsessed with television. And I didn't know that in a weird way, it was sort of me putting in my 10,000 hours of just watching things on repeat, because it was an escape. I mean, I don't think a 9-year-old watches Sleepless in Seattle as much as I did, but I was like, I don't know if I just wanted Tom Hanks to be my dad.
I mean, I was going to say, I wonder why that particular movie would have hit you as like a fantasy of
fetching, tall brunette man, where I'm like, he could be my dad. Tom, I wound up playing Tom later in life in Turner and Hooch remake.
Yes.
And not sure he was a fan, but yeah, so basically that was a lot of our life. And, I say in the book, funny people are usually funny for very unfunny reasons. And I think for me, being chubby and 8 years old and kind of this musical theater kid and being, not having a pops, like I use comedy as this defense mechanism because I assumed I walked into situations at a disadvantage.
Well, this is really important, and I love the way you write about this. And if you haven't read the book, it turns out not only is he funny and quick and so charming, but I mean, you're a very good writer, and you wrote the book yourself, which most people don't in your position. And but you do, I got the sense reading it, and you and I are friends, but there was a lot I didn't know about your circumstance. You talked to me about your dad and your mom, but I don't think I realized the extent to which you had to craft a persona to be able to walk into rooms and survive and get people enlisted in your and your mother's journey at times.
Sure.
And how much of that was conscious on your part and how much of it was just reacting to the circumstance? Because I feel like in the way you write about it, it led to this decision to begin auditioning and stuff. So,
yeah, I mean, it's just like social currency. Like, you don't want to be the sad chubby kid.
Right.
Like, you don't want to be like, life's hard, Like, if you're the funny chubby kid, like, you get elevated. I remember I told this like completely dirty joke I had overheard my mom tell at like this Jewish dinner. Like, no one has talked this dirty at Passover ever. And I'm like, well, aunts and uncles, wait till you hear this. And I remember I like just spewed out this joke, and this sort of like silence fills the room, and then people start cracking up. And I think that was like the moment at 9 years old where I was like, oh, I got it. Like, this is a value, this is currency. Suddenly I was like, I say in the book, I was upgraded to the adult table. And then, I went to performing arts high school in New York, and I remember that being, because, I had Jewish relatives growing up who were like, this hobby is cute. You'll be going to business school. Don't bring shame to our family. And I was like, listen, our real last name is Peckerman, okay? Too late. And so but then I went to performing arts high school, and that was the result of my mom and I having a really tough sort of summer and sort of being financially insecure. And I was supposed to go to middle school 104 on 20th between 1st and 2nd, but we kind of got kicked out of our apartment and we were sort of displaced. And my mom was like, well, you don't really have a school in your district anymore. Why don't you try this one? You love performing. And suddenly I'm in this school with like, it's like Fame. Kids are singing in the hallways, and the dancers are going to Alvin Ailey every afternoon. And suddenly I was like, oh, this can actually be a thing people do for their whole life.
Let's back up a second though. What was your self-talk when your mom says to you, we can't stay here?
Right.
Because what happens there that allows you, like a lot of, I mean, I think if I heard that, I think my instinct might be I might have crumbled at 8 years old or 9 years old. I mean, what do you think it was in you that allowed you to go the other way with it and say, well, I'm gonna like make the best of this, or I'm gonna survive? Was it that you felt you had to keep her spirits buoyed? I mean, what was happening inside you? What was the story you were telling yourself about the circumstance?
Yeah, I don't know what was implanted at what age, except this idea of like, I didn't like being powerless. I didn't like being at sort of the whim of what happened outside of my control. And comedy was powerful. And there's no like, Colin Quinn has this great quote where it's like, comedy is the closest form of justice in the arts, right? Because there's no interpreting laughter. Like, it either happens or it doesn't. And, you can be subjective. You can like me, and some people don't like me. You can prefer Drake.
We love you. No. We love you.
No.
Please, I mean, that's...
But you know what I mean? Like, as acting, you know, there's some people are a Pacino guy, some people are a De Niro guy, you know.
Yes.
But I got to actually do 2 scenes in a movie with Al Pacino once. In the middle of a scene, I kid you not, we're like doing the scene, like proper scene, and he goes, "Oh," and I was like, he's going full Pacino. I was like, he's doing it, and then he goes, "Oh," and I'm like, do I do it back? Like, do I haw him? And then he just committed, and then he went back into his line, and I'm like, that's why you're Al Pacino, because you don't self-judge when you have a haw.
No, he goes.
In the middle. No, he's like, I'm fully hawing right now.
Yeah, that guy is a total inspiration. I got to make a movie with him once, and he's a complete inspiration.
Oh,
because he's
man.
lives it as an artist completely.
Yeah, he's the dude. He's the dude.
Yeah, no, he really is. But you were saying that we were talking about the sort of way you were figuring out who you were going to be in that moment.
Yeah, I just think that it just was something that I clearly knew. I liked the spoils of it. I enjoyed making people laugh. I liked the currency that it gave me to sort of navigate socially. It just, I certainly didn't want to be at a disadvantage, which I thought I was. And if I could be typical, great. I was happy to be just baseline. But if I could be a little special, I would
Sure.
think that's
But
it.
a lot of the book talks about the way in which when you get older, though, that some of this stuff snaps back in a way at you because you have to grapple with it. And so at the time, as you made the decision to start auditioning, let's say, when we talk about these decisions that you made, how much do you think you were stuffing the fear down? I guess that's what I want to understand. Was there fear as a top note for you? Or was it something you really weren't aware of till later, how much insecurity you had about your situation?
Yeah, I guess I just felt like I was I had this like unique skill. And it's not something, if it had been baseball, I would have been one of many, because it's like a normal skill of a kid in middle school. But there's, one actor kid. And then I went to performing arts high school, and like pretty quickly I raised myself to the level that they were playing at. So and then of course, like with each subsequent job, like I remember I showed up to, I tell this story in the book. So I used to audition at Nickelodeon like 2-3 times a week, right? And they were at 1515 Broadway, which you guys probably don't remember, but there was a show called TRL, which was like the dopest shit. Shout out, Mom. And thank you. And it was at 1515 Broadway, and then Nickelodeon was like at the top of this huge Viacom tower in Times Square. And I was, chubby, ambitious, and ready. And so they were like, I was like, Nickelodeon, this is obvious, hire me. This makes sense for you. And I wind up getting this Nickelodeon movie called Snow Day. And one day I'm talking, it's like, 20 degrees, we're in Calgary, Canada. And I'm talking to this guy, and I'm just making him laugh, doing some of my old like bits from my stand-up act. And my mom sort of sidles over to me, and she goes, "You know who that is? That's Albie Hecht. He's the president of Nickelodeon. You should tell him that you want to be on the show that you've always wanted to be on, which was All That, which was like, SNL for kids. It was so good." And I did, and I'll never forget. 9 months later, he was like, I've got good news, Josh. I'm gonna fly you and your mom to California to be on the Amanda Show. And yeah. And that changed my life. But even then, when I entered, I was like, all of a sudden I'm with Amanda, who like is 6 months older than me, but in skill and ability is so far above me when I show up. And instead of being like frustrated or intimidated, I'm like, I have to study this, because this is really special.
Well, what did it feel like when you started getting to do the work? Meaning, when you were finally actually, because you tell this difficult moment where an agent is talking about, because of the way you looked, you couldn't get parts.
Too fat for commercials.
I wasn't going to say that, but which now I'm picturing Al Pacino as the agent, by the way. But yeah. Telling you to. But so that's where you start. But then you start to really get work. And what did it feel like when you were doing the work? So you're not trying to make the Purim table laugh. Right. You're trying to make, you're in it. Did it feel to you very natural, comfortable?
Yeah.
More comfortable than the rest of life?
I think so. I mean, yeah, it felt like an escape. It felt like this flow state. It felt like I was recharging to go out and like trudge in the normal world where I was just like, like another kind of insecure teen, like who wasn't special. But on this set, under these circumstances, these pretenses, I was operating at this level where I was comfortable, and it was all me doing my mom's shtick. My mom used to be my mom when I would do my stand-up act, and I would sometimes practice in front of her. Her favorite line was "Milk it, babe." Milk it. And I'd be like, and like I hear that sometimes still at auditions. I'm like, no, Josh, don't milk it.
Don't milk it.
Don't lean in. But so I would go up there and I would milk it. I remember once a director looked at me and he was like,
"Oh Lord."
I was like, what is that hand gesture? Like, sorry, I didn't grow up on a farm. But yeah, but that worked because Nickelodeon at that time was shticky and big and.
How old were you were you 16 when you got that?
No, I was
13. 13. So you're 13 years old, and you guys fly out. You and your mom fly to California?
Freshly bar mitzvahed.
Yeah.
We had it at an Italian restaurant on 38th Street because my mom was like, yo, no one wants to hear all that Hebrew. She's like, let's get to the apps. And I was like, all right, respect. Great time. My theme, Broadway. I know you were wondering.
When you just tell me when we should switch to Yiddish completely.
Yeah.
But when you got out there, you describe in the book that it took a minute for you to feel like you were really part of the company, or for them to really write to you.
Yes.
And you also did, like for most people, I would think, I got a show would kind of salvage everything. But the way you describe it, even those first few years, it seems like you felt like you were half inside and half an outsider still.
Yeah.
Is that right? And how did you, when you would show up to work, how did you go about without creating political turmoil, how did you go about getting them to want to write for you? Because it's great when you talk about it in the book. I loved reading about this.
Yeah.
So please talk about it.
I mean, especially on a sketch comedy show, it's just easy to become a utility guy. And so
explain what that means to people who might not know what utility guy means in that context.
Yeah, you're waiter number 2
right.
in scenes. And I remember I played like a hot dog vendor, and literally like my big moment in the scene was I walk down and hand the hot dog and go back up the stairs. And after like take 4, I was pretty winded. But I knew that I had this ability, and I knew this shtick worked with my friends, and I also had evidence. I had data to support it because I'd been doing stand-up for 4 years. So like I'm literally in audiences.
Wait, we have to own this for a second. Like understand it. You were 13 and you'd been doing stand-up for 4 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of a not really a typical story even for this stage, right? Because you were doing stand-up at grown-up stand-up clubs, not just in afternoon shows.
Oh no, like Catch a Rising Star and Stand Up New York and Gotham, and they would sneak me in at 11 o'clock like through the back door so that they wouldn't lose their liquor license. And I'd be like, good evening, And I'd be like, who likes Pokemon? No. Crowd work. But I had 5 minutes of like material that worked, and sometimes I could stretch it to 7.
Right.
And I just polished it because I knew I couldn't like do crowd
What
work.
would a typical night be like of stand-up? Like, how would that work? Would your mom would drive you from gig to gig, or you would take the subway? Like, what did that?
Yeah.
At 10 years old, walk me through what that was like.
So we would normally like I'd go to school. She'd pick me up at 3. She's a responsible parent, so she's like, we're staying up late. Nap. So
you would go home and nap before the stand-up show?
Yeah, an hour or so. Then leftover Chinese for dinner. I know you were wondering. And then like 9 o'clock. Depends on when my set was. So if it was like, usually I wasn't doing like the really late night bringer shows like 12, 1. But like anywhere between 9 and 11, I'd go up for a quick 5 minutes. And a lot of weekend stuff.
And then when you
church basements, I would do like random stuff and Sea Caucus, just like random shows where they would.
Did you talk to the other comedians?
They didn't really talk to me.
Yeah, right. Like, so what was that? Another kind of like inside or outside? Like, what would that be like?
I don't know. Maybe they thought it was like a crime.
I mean, Have you ever run into any of those like comedians who wouldn't let you sit at the comics table? Since you know.
The only one was I once performed on a TV show with Dave Chappelle.
Really?
Yeah, called Fox.
When you were 10 years old?
It was called Fox After Breakfast, and it was right before Half Baked, and he was a stand-up, and I was a stand-up. We're both on this show, and I remember saying to him, I was like, you know, we have a lot in common. And I recently showed him that picture, and he has no recollection of it.
Oh, wait, you did?
Yeah, I did.
Well, okay, did you say to him, we used to work together? Like,
yeah. I was just like, I just feel the need to share this with you. And he got a total kick out of it, but I think he was like, how did this happen?
How is that picture not in your book?
I know, I need more pictures in the book.
Yeah, how's there not a picture of you and Chappelle in the book? Just before we move on to like sort of the next things, I mean, what is, because just looking at the title, and the book has a lot of really heavy stuff in it about big transformations that you made, which I want to cover in the time we have left. But what is like the top line message that you hope you're communicating in the book? What was it? Yes, the thing you were saying about people, but what is the thing you hope a reader who, let's say, is struggling a little bit, what do you want them to take away?
At 35, my life has been so impacted in a positive way by people being willing to be transparent with their own challenges and the trials that they faced. And I felt like uniquely, what I felt that I had that maybe other people didn't was that, like, you grew up with me, you saw me go through it. And maybe you didn't know exactly what I was going through, but surely when you read the book and I sort of illustrate this time in my life when I'm 19 on set and I'm struggling, a memory will pop back into your mind being like, I remember that episode. Like, he was struggling then, like that was hard for him. And you don't always get that with
that people are covering, and that you think people are all happier than you and killing it all the time,
right.
But that they might be covering. And then in fact, have empathy for them, and maybe there will be some empathy back toward you.
Like my favorite type of advice is when, if you're on a rock wall and you're sort of summiting up to the peak, like if someone's at the peak and they're looking down saying like, just hold on, you'll make it. I'll be like, I feel the need to be like, just drink your Gatorade and shut up. Like, you have no idea what I'm going through. Like, my arms are gonna give out. But if someone is like 2 feet above me and kind of saying like, try this hold, it worked great for me 10 minutes ago. Like, that's what this book is. It's views from the halfway point. It's me being like, I'm 35, I wanted to write this because like, I was afraid that if I waited till I was 45 or 55, I'd forget how fresh these feelings were, that what the struggle was like in my 20s and early 30s, and when I felt like I had had this unique, wonderful life in so many ways, and yet there were times where I did despair and I did feel completely uncomfortable in my own skin, and to sort of share walking through that, some of that joy and grace that I'd so been searching for.
Well, one thing that I was really struck by, because as you're talking now and you're talking about this skill set that you had, this ability, you had the ability to go up to the head of a network and say, I should be on this show, and to manifest that and make it happen. And then you sit on the sketch show, you started talking about how you were able to sort of show the writers who you were so they would write about you.
Yeah.
It was write for you to kill in the pieces, and then you were able to kill in the sketches. But you had a real crisis of confidence and of the soul about your own skills as an actor at a certain point, right? And I think that would be a really shocking thing for most people who, like you say, have been watching you kill it for your whole life, basically. You're a kid who got on stage at 9 years old as a comedian. So I think it would be instructive, and I think really take your time and talk about sort of you get this movie. I don't know if everyone here has seen this great movie Josh is in called The Whackness that won awards at Sundance, and he was really incredibly single. That's an incredible piece of work, directed by Jonathan Levine, and it's a fantastic film. But you tell this beautiful, heartbreaking story about being at Sundance, the movie killing, people giving you a standing ovation, and you feeling like you had to leave. You didn't want this attention. You go home. I mean, you talk about it, and talk about, I think, all that you went through, who you were in that moment, the way you felt like you were living a certain kind of lie, and then your own discovery about where you were as an actor and what you did about it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I guess I sort of have to start at the beginning. So
Please do.
I get Drake and Josh, and I'm doing the kind of comedy that I dreamed of doing. My favorite kind, even to this day. I mean, like, I would, die to work for you, Brian. Like, that's like my, the kind of stuff you make is the stuff that I love. And then there's like this little part of me that's like, oh man, but like a 2.5 Men sequel would be fun too.
Right, yeah,
like,
you'd be great in that.
I like sticking it up, you know what I mean? And I love, great high quality, great acting work too. And so I'm doing this thing on Drake and Josh, and it's like this moment, but I was introducing myself to the world in a body that I wasn't comfortable in. And I find that people fall in love with you, or people marry themselves to the first image they fall in love with. Like Steve Carell is one of our greatest actors, but to many of us he'll always be Michael Scott because we so love that show, we love that character. He gave that to us. And so there I was, as kind of like this chubby, funny guy, and it was certainly on a part of a long legacy of chubby, funny guys. And so then when I inevitably started to lose weight, I felt like I kind of took this guy away from people. That suddenly this person who people had fallen in love with, they felt like, oh, you're making us, you're introducing us to this new sort of version of yourself, and we're not sure we're on board with this. But basically what it was I, when I was 16, the parts for chubby guys were the funny best friend or the bully.
Bully, yeah.
Judd Apatow wasn't around then, writing for non-traditional leading men such as myself. Like, there was no Seth Rogen, there's no Jonah Hill. Like, and I kind of take the piss out of myself in the book about like the physical stuff, and I just do it in a way to say like I think body positivity and everything that we've grown and the strides we've made is beautiful and necessary. And I walk through the mall now with my son all the time because we love commerce and food courts and. And you look in the windows of, and you see like the models and these huge ads, and there's all these shapes and different body sizes, and it's beautiful and representation in ways we never saw. But in the 90s, it just wasn't that way. And so at 16, I realized that if I wanted to work more and I wanted to do the parts to challenge me, I'd have to sort of lose weight. And so I did that, and I suddenly was like in this new body. And I was like, I did it. I got in right before like the buzzer. I'm 18 and I lose 110 pounds. And then I sort of discovered drugs and alcohol, and I'm like, oh, well, this is much more efficacious and so few calories. Yeah. And I do that for a couple years, and that's like not bad, or that's not bad, not good. It's all bad really, because I'm basically becoming a cliche in record time, and I proceed to sort of set my life on fire. But then it comes to this movie, The Whackness. And this is the thing that I had dreamed of. Like, I lost the weight, and I'm not just a kid actor. I'm not just like the child actor, because that stigma scared the shit out of me. Because like for every Zendaya, there's like 1,000 of us who just like perpetuate the cliche, And
I think it's important you point this out in the book, and you should tell people, because you said this to me the other day too, that it was really important that people understand, so they understand other kid actors.
Yeah.
As you were making this transformation, talk about where you were financially, because I know this matters to you for people to understand what happens after a 6-year run on like one of the top 2 shows on a huge network.
Right.
And people looked at you like, well, he's set. I mean, talk about where that left you.
Well,
when you were about to.
Yeah, there's no residuals on kids' TV. So there was no, like, financially, I was not in a position to, like, we didn't make a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, you said to me the other day, you had like, what, 6 months of runway, and then it was as though that never existed. You were in a different body, you were trying to do different things,
yeah.
and people assumed that you were able to live a certain kind of life, but you were almost back to being as sort of financially insecure as you were when you were living in the city, sharing a slice of pizza, right?
Yeah, it wasn't, you weren't the kid from Modern Family. You were like, kids TV was just a different thing. So yeah, I probably had like a year of runway left. And like my mom and I lived nicely when I did the show. We had a nice 2-bedroom apartment, rented, good amenities.
Right, yeah.
Pool. But yeah, I mean, we weren't living high on the hog. We just, it just wasn't a lot of dough. And I think that's sort of people don't always know that when it comes to kids TV. So basically it all sort of the apex is I do this movie, The Whackness. It's with my favorite actor, Sir Ben Kingsley. I'm like playing this, drug dealer in New York City in 1994, like the greatest time for hip hop ever. And it premieres at the Sundance Film Festival, which I had gone when I was 16. I was like, one day I'm gonna be back here and I'm gonna be starring in a movie. And I'm there. And we're at the screening, and Quentin Tarantino's there, and I'm like, this is happening, like, I've done it. And I go to bed that night, and I go, I just assumed that tomorrow morning I would wake up, and I would be a different person. Like, I truly
Internally, you thought that love would be the thing you needed to answer.
It just was everything I'd always wanted. It was truly like, I just wanted to be an actor amongst actors, not a kid actor, not the funny fat guy, an actor. And I was. And I wake up and I was like, oh no, Josh is still here. And it just was that, because we all have that, right? That little voice that wakes us up a few minutes before we actually get up and tells us all the reasons we're not enough, or all the reasons why things aren't gonna work out. And I just was like, it confirmed my worst suspicion, which was that I was bottomless. That like, food couldn't fill it, drugs couldn't fill it, and now even like prestige and success couldn't do it. And I got sober three weeks later at 21.
Right, well that's awesome that you did.
But I think I needed
But then on
that.
the other side, so you described that everyone's telling you to go and party at Sundance and drink up and meet filmmakers and get your next opportunity, and all you wanted to do was go back to LA and start using drugs again and forgetting yourself, right?
Oh yeah, and people were like, this never happens, right? You're leaving? I was like, my flight leaves in an hour.
Right, you had to get out of there.
Yeah.
But the other thing, so there's this incredible transformation, which is you get yourself sober through the help of people, and you do it. But then this amazing thing that I've almost never heard an actor admit, and it's so touching and beautiful, because you are great in The Whackness. I mean, that performance is, as you know, we met because we talked about doing a movie right after I'd seen The Whackness, right? Dave and I had seen it. But then you have an insight that you don't think you're a good actor. And you talk about this in the book, which for anyone who's insecure about anything that they do, it's such a beautiful thing to read, because you don't just go like, I suck at acting and have a tantrum. You go, I don't think I have this craft, and I better figure it out. Please talk about that, because I think that's so useful for people to understand. Even someone as successful as you, Sundance is cheering. How does this happen? How does it happen that you allow yourself to not only feel that, but to take action about it? And talk about, because it's great and funny, like when you actually go to your first acting class.
I certainly felt it, and then I did have some data to support it. I was in this movie Red Dawn, where I played Chris Hemsworth's brother, because that makes sense. That whole experience was sort of that's like a 4-month emotional breakdown for me. Because I'm like newly sober, right? But like I'd never worked out, and I'd like lost all this weight, and they were like, you're gonna be an action star, so you should work out with Navy SEALs. And I'm like, bet. And like they wouldn't work me out, and I remember I would have like these meltdowns in the middle of it. They'd be like, hey, do an air squat, and I'd be like, okay. They'd be like, you see what you're doing wrong there? And I'm like, I don't know, everything.
Yeah.
I remember there was one scene in particular where I was like running down the middle of the street in Detroit, and explosions are going off, and there's a camera on a helicopter, and I've got an AK-47, and I was just thinking, I'm Josh from Drake and Josh. They made a terrible mistake. Oh my God. And Chris Hemsworth's walking around being Chris Hemsworth, and like naturally just an Adonis with this Australian. He used to call, like, he was a little older than us, so there were a lot of younger, like 21-year-olds in the movie, and he would call us cubs. And he'd walk by us and he'd be like, oi, tired little cubs. Like, we'd be in the lunch line, he'd be like, oi, hungry cubs. I'd be like, don't do that. He's a great guy. Shout out Chris. We kept in touch, and then he got super famous.
Right.
I was like, this tracks. When the bubble turned green, I thought he had an iPhone.
That's funny. That's so sad.
I'm kidding. Chris Hemsworth.
Whoever knows Chris Hemsworth, tell him to reach out. Josh needs him.
It's
the last thing Josh needs to finally feel okay.
I'm a great
is a phone call from Chris Hemsworth. But get to the thing of of feeling like you forgot how to act.
I mean, I just think that I was inconsistent, right? Because there was certainly data that supported like I'd done good work.
Great, yeah.
But then there was data that supported that I didn't do good work. But what I knew for sure was that it felt like this alchemy, like that when it worked, I had like summoned the forces of good acting. And I was like, no, this can't be. Because like the people I look up to are good all the time. So what am I missing? Like, why is it that sometimes with the right part and the perfect director, I can be beaten into a good performance, but if I don't have all those things lined up, I'm so embarrassed. So, I realized that I had to go back to acting class, which was this ego-deflating thing, because, walking into that class, I knew that I had probably a lot more credits than other people in that class.
You're the person the other people in the class would be like, tell me how to be good at acting.
Yeah, maybe.
And if they just saw you walk in, it's like,
But it's also this idea of like, I think we all live our lives with this like slight emotional caveat, whether we know it or not, and this idea of like, well, I didn't give myself 100% to this, but had I, it would have worked out. Right? Because I think we give ourselves this little safety net because we don't want to ever face the idea that like I gave it my everything and it still didn't work out. And I certainly at 28 or 29 when I went back, I could, it was about summoning up the courage to be like, I devoted my life to this thing. My identity's wrapped up in it. And I might do everything in my power to become good and still not be great. And that's...
But you were willing to risk that to finally
I had to
do the thing.
Because I knew that inevitably, like, I just wouldn't get the parts that I wanted.
And now you booked a fucking Chris Nolan movie, man.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, incredible. You did it. All right. These are questions that you all asked. We'll get through as many of them as we can.
First, I got to say thank you, Brian, for doing this. Can we get a round of applause for Brian?
My absolute pleasure. I love you.
This guy, I so look up to you, man. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. Thanks for saying my pleasure. All right, this question. You didn't put your names, so I'm just going to ask them. Josh, writing about yourself and your life requires so much vulnerability. Was there an aspect of your memoir that felt difficult for you to be honest about? And if so, what's changed and why? Do you want to share it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, when I wrote the chapter about losing weight, like I think much like this conversation, like I tried to lean on the comedy of things and not go too in depth. And our good friend Ryan Holiday, who's a brilliant author and is 10-time bestseller, who was my advisor on the book, who basically I'd send him pages and he'd send it back and tell me what I needed to make better. He said, this might be the funniest book in the world. Don't worry, it won't be. But you could succeed in that. He's like, but if you don't get honest and raw with what you were feeling in these moments, no one's gonna care. And he's like, this chapter of when you lost weight is the most pivotal moment of your life. So you have to write it as though you were gonna write it to that kid at 16 who might cry reading this. So I think that was like this certainly a challenging part of it. And then I tell the story of what happened with Judd Apatow in the book, which was certainly, I suppose I have to tell it now.
Tell it.
So when I finished Drake and Josh, I'm like being a total cliche, boozing and sowing my wild oats and just being 19 and supremely stupid. And I wind up getting this part in a Judd Apatow movie, and I auditioned for him. It's called Drobit Taylor with Owen Wilson and Danny McBride and all these brilliant comedians. And he's like, listen, you're not right for the part you auditioned for, but you're funny. So come and be funny. Like, come hang out on set. We'll write you little parts. We'll figure it out. Write jokes for other people. Just be around. It'll be great. So I was like, bet. And so I just was sleeping too late and unreliable. And I would show up on set and I would spend most of the time in the trailer. Like, I wasn't a monster. I was just a bummer. And I just could not show up for this guy who really set me up to win. And I remember the first 3 days of the movie were actually going pretty well. And he said to me, we're sitting behind the monitor, he's like, hey, I'm working on this other movie. You should come by and maybe we'll find a little part for you in that too. And I was like, oh yeah, what's it called? And he goes, Superbad. And I was like, I'll try.
But then, what happened? He wrote you a note, didn't he?
Yeah, I basically was just late and totally dropping the ball, and he wrote me this note that was like, this is unacceptable. Like, and it'll never be okay here or any other set. And like, you really need to work on
The note's great because you show it in the thing you say where he talks about that you're talented and funny and great. And
Yeah.
you could have this great run.
Right.
But you're sabotaging yourself in a way.
It's exactly right. And I was originally, it was written as a very powerful producer in Hollywood said. And Ryan, our friend, was like, you gotta say Judd. Like, you have to tell us who it is, otherwise we won't get the gut punch for you.
It's great because he is the best, and it's horrible that you did that to Judd. So
I mean,
yes,
well, thanks, Brian.
I'm sure it's fine by now.
But also, I would never have told that story had I not seen him since and made a proper amends and felt like, okay, like if this was still an unhealed sort of thing,
Of course.
I wouldn't have felt comfortable sharing it.
And the other thing, I want to get to these questions, and so I was going to ask you a lot about this, but you have to read the book to understand the way Josh figures out a bunch of stuff about who his dad is and what other family he has out there and the series of decisions he makes about how he wants to either proceed in finding them and getting to know them or not. It's very moving and fascinating and really worth reading for that. And we could have made this whole thing just about that. And we also talk about it on the podcast, so we didn't have to talk about it here. What advice do you have for someone starting from scratch and trying to be an artist? And how do you stay positive and motivated when you're dealing with rejection?
Well, I think if you make art, you're an artist. You know, like the only thing you're aspiring to is greatness. But it's, you know, there's levels to it. I always try to say, like, it's the best time ever, right? Because the reason I moved to social media for a big part of my career and still do it was the ability in which to bypass the gatekeepers. Like,
Yes.
You don't have to live in a coastal city anymore. There is no nepotism. You don't have to have an agent or a manager. Like, if you want to tell a story, if you want to communicate something and you have enough technology in your pocket to, you know, like if you have an iPhone or an Android, you have enough technology to capture it. And so you have to be brave and you have to be willing to put it out there. I talk about in the book, when I started my YouTube channel, I spent a year like getting, thank you, shout out. We love a mukbang, yes. You know, when I started YouTube, I had like dismal views for like a year. And it was like this weird R&D sort of time where I was figuring out what worked and what didn't. And a buddy of mine, Joe, from my podcast, Male Models, thank you so much. We have a modeler out there, good looking out. It's just about two attractive guys. And we, you know, he said to me finally one time, he's like, you know, you sort of made your money and your life and career being in front of the camera. Like, maybe you're not the guy who talks to his camera in the middle of the airport. Maybe I'm the guy who films you and you find a way to be funny and comfortable. And I was like, well, if we can add chicken wings into the equation,
Right.
I'll soar.
Yeah.
And I decided to get some food and talk some shit with a friend and do it on camera, and that video got 5 million views.
But when you said, just to get to the heart of this question, you know, you very quickly said, and I think maybe this is part of the self-hypnosis moving forward, you very quickly said, look, I had dismal views in the beginning, but you had gone from, just for, in case some people here don't know, you had gone from being one of the biggest people on Vine,
Right.
and then that being a real income source for you, and a different lease on life, and it kind of gave you the freedom to just audition for what you wanted and not to care, and then that got shut down.
Right.
And you started on YouTube and you were back toward the bottom again. And in the book, you really talk about what other people, like basically other people might have been judging it and you had to press on. Because the question's about what, between that moment and the moment when you got 5 million views,
Right.
what's going on in your head? How are you not focusing on, shit, the other day, there were 30 million Vine loops. And today there's only 10,000 people. Like, how do you not, many of us would focus on that instead of I can get back to the millions of people. So how do you do that?
I think it's just inevitably, it's gotta be about the creating at the end of the day. It's like gotta be about.
So you lose yourself you were able to just lose yourself in the work part.
Yeah, like if I'm eating Popeyes on camera, I know this is gonna last. I don't lay down easy, and I think that like I just take like these little micro wins, even if it's just where I felt
That's
more
valuable.
comfortable, and and there's something that resonates with someone, and you can just sort of like do these like micro, like you can track when something's just moving in the right direction. And again, you want it to be like, you want it to be like the stock market. Like on any given day, it could shoot up or fall down 1,000 points, but it tends to trend up. And that's what's exciting, is that like as creators, you don't need permission anymore, but also you cannot wait, because there's no excuse anymore, right? Like, upload something tomorrow, and if it makes you laugh or cry or feel anything, eventually I believe it'll find its audience.
Perfectly said. Somebody writes, your podcast, Curious, got me through some dark times and really inspired me, which actually I know is what you were hoping to do with that. They say thanks for that. And they're curious, who would your dream guest have been to interview on Curious?
Oh, man. I mean, Oprah? No.
Perfect answer.
Shout out Oprah. I was watching her Instagram the other day, because I'm that guy. And she was eating this beautiful dinner. And I remember her just being like, I'm going to have cornbread. And I was like, you have it, queen. I was like, you deserve it. But it's my dad. That could be interesting. I don't particularly know. I mean, listen, I think a dope one would be, honestly, my mom. Like, and
yeah, you should bring it back. You should do it.
She's pretty tremendous and spectacular, and especially now having a kid, and it's the beautiful way the universe punches you in the face. Because like my son's been sick like the past few days with just like a normal cold, and it's hard, and it's me and my wife and my mother-in-law and all this support, and it was just her dealing with like this kid and financial strain, and I had asthma, because of course I did.
Yeah.
And all this shit, and she did it alone, and she's pretty spectacular. So I thank her for that.
I mean, that's a perfect place to end. An applause for you.
Thank you.
Applause for your mom.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. That was great, dude. Killed it. Great work.